India's rise through your own theories, through your own concept, through your own method, we are also going to contribute for the democratization of international relations. So nowadays, as we discussed about Eurocentrism, this and that, that is fine. But the main purpose is to democratize international relations, and by doing that, you are also going to use those theories, methods, and concepts for your rise as a major world power. So that is basically I'm going to highlight. Yeah. So, epistemic power is the crucial ability to shape global narratives and define what is considered truth in international relations. So, we have seen how, Morgenthau used Cold War experience to claim about classical realism, right? Then we had neorealism. Then there are four varieties of neorealism, right? We have, subaltern realism, we have defensive realism, we have offensive realism, we have new realism. Then we have a liberal theory, that was also based on the criticism or dialogue going on between realism and liberalism. And there are also varieties of new, realism. Then is Marxism. So all these theories, all these methods, they claim about the universality nature of the application of the theories, but they are all based on Western experiences. Which theory is based on Indian experience? Nothing, because as we discussed during the morning session, everything is close to Europe. Europe was the center of gravity, and that is why everything, all knowledge is developed keeping in view of the European or American experience. For great powers, this means setting the intellectual agenda, dictating the terms of debate, and framing global challenges to their advantage. Think of NPT, think of CTBT. They were all negotiated when you have no power, when you had no voice. That's why those were crafted keeping in view of the American and other superpowers' interest and other major powers' interest. Think of change. Think of TO. When these are negotiated, you play an important role and you try to secure your own interest. Because everybody now is trying to set the global agenda in a way that benefits it. America set the liberal order that benefited America. America established the Bretton Woods systems, World Bank, IMF, that benefited it. America talked of globalized, benefited it. America wanted to bring China to globalize, that benefited China. And now America is talking of make America great again, talking of deglobalization or deliberalization. So that's a different thing. Historical example like Britain's civilizing mission and America's democratic peace theory illustrate how they use legitimate power. Right? So exporting democracy, free trade is good. American model of development is good. So all these are all American ideas that supported America. And similarly, the white man warden theory, just remember that white man warden theory. God has made some people white so that they have civilized the blacks. But during that civilization mission that led to colonialism and imperialism, how many people were killed, how they were treated, what kind of looting and plundering they were engaged in, just remember. British historians and American historians, they have documented carefully. Even Shashi Tharoor has written that about $40 trillion was looted from India only. Now India's economy is less than $5 trillion. American economy is $34 trillion. China is less than 50. So just imagine before 37, they looted 39 to $40 trillion. And $1 trillion is equal to $1,000 billion. So nobody, no theory talks about this. No theory talks about the impact of colonial. Rather, it is all highlighted that because of the civilizing mission of the United States, United Kingdom, you got bureaucracy, you got English education, you got liberal education, you got this reforms, you got that reform. So everything should be highlighted, but this is all selective. That is why, because this is all selective because that's of their interest. In fact, Robert Cox said, theories are always made by someone for some purpose. So if you look at from this and all the theories, they all were created to support their global leadership, intellectual legitimacy, that is the main purpose. Investing in knowledge production, think tanks and academic discourse is a powerful form of support, aligning others to a state's worldview. So for doing that, you need to develop good quality think tanks like the Rand Foundation, like the MacArthur Foundation, like the Ford Foundation, the Royal Institute of International Affairs. These are the think tanks that supported United Kingdom's power or the American power. So you need to have that kind of think tanks, and the academic discourse also should be based on power, because nowadays you can't do anything with hard power alone. You need soft power, you need hard power, you need a good combination of both. That is what is called smart power. Right? So everybody has now become smart. You have smartphone, you have smart, you need also smart power. Right? So that is how you have to invest a lot of resources on this. So I just give two examples. Why it is not moving forward? हैंग हो गया ना, देखा हैंग हो गया. आगे करो. Yes. हो गया ये चाहिए. ठीक. Yeah, let us start with the example how the United Kingdom used international relations to exercise power and hegemony in international relations. Just think, Britain strategically championed the balance of power theory for about 200 years, right? Just after, you know, the defeat of Napoleon, United Kingdom used balance of power to maintain peace in Europe so that it can peacefully concentrate on its colonies. So if Europe would remain volatile or Europe would create problem for the United Kingdom, so United Kingdom will be engaged in local wars. So that's why they champion the concept of balance of power to maintain peace in Europe, to maintain peace between Prussia, Austria, France, and Russia. So that was the reason why the United States championed United Kingdom championed the concept of balance of power for almost 200 years. Imperial geopolitics, like the great game or the strategic importance of controlling certain territories, provided intellectual justification for expansion and securing resources. Right? So you are talking of great game in Central Asia, in Afghanistan. You created buffer state between Russia and India. You created buffer state like Nepal, that acted as a buffer between China and India. Right? So this whole concept of great game, and many intellectual scholars were engaged in this kind of justification, so that you exercise power in your colonies and you control other great powers so that they don't do anything for creating problem for your colonies. So that was the major reason. The civilizing mission served as an ideological blanket, legitimizing vast colonial resources by portraying exploitation as benevolent progress. Just imagine, you had the as I said, they took a lot of resources from India, and that was the reason why they become prosperous. United Kingdom, it has now become the most third world country in the first world. But at a time when they took about 40 trillion dollars from India alone. Forget about their colonial position from Africa, from Southeast Asia, from many other parts. So if this kind of resources was taken from or taken out of India, that led to industrial revolution in United Kingdom, that led to industrial revolution in Europe, that led to their richness. So, so plundering resources needed a kind of, mass, ideological mass, and that mass was used in the form of deflating missions. So your purpose is not to exploit, your purpose is to civilize. You have to give democracy. You have to give democracy. You have to give railway. Those points were highlighted, but actually the point, what kind of colonial suffering people went through. India, that was the richest economy of the world till 1000 AD, and it became the second largest economy of the world, including almost 24% of world GDP. It became a third world economy. So how this happened? So it means the resources which was most important, the capital and the and human resources. Just imagine, not just the capital, all the human, the British fought the First World War and Second World War with Indian soldiers. So these are not highlighted, and that is why they use always a cover, and that cover was civilizing missions, modern theory. So these kind of concepts were used by the Britishers to perpetuate their colonialism, to perpetuate their imperialism in different parts of the world. This naval supremacy was underpinned by strategic thought, focusing on controlling global sea lane for trade. So you have become a maritime power. Maritime, how you become a maritime power? It's because you have control over navy. So you are a naval power, and that's why you control all the sea resources, all the trade routes. You had monopoly over the resources, and all world trade was done in your terms. You dictate terms. You got the benefit. You did engage with trade with others. You also dictated the terms. You got also revenue by allowing others to do trade. So that was the basic objective of British, colonialism, and that is how they use international relations and sophisticated concepts like balance of power perpetuate their colonialism, to use their colonialism to exercise that power or to use their hegemony. So that was the British style. But what was the American style? I think it's creating problem. British, ये आगे पीछे हो रहा है चलो कोई आप एक बैठो मैं कहूंगा तो आप उसको फॉरवर्ड करो मेरे से वो नहीं हो रहा है anyway, the American style, how, what the American do. The United States promoted liberal internationalism. This was screen bada chota ho raha hai. Liberal internationalism, just after the Second World War, right? So, the whole, the whole concept of liberal international order was actually illiberal. It was illiberal because there was no scope for other countries except the United States and its Western allies. Even Japan and Germany, they had no space in that liberal order. Think of the United Nations Security Council. Think of the World Bank, IMF. They don't have adequate voice in the World Bank or IMF. So it was all structured by the Americans, designed by the Americans for perpetuating their interest. World Bank president is always from America. IMF director is always a European. Where is the scope for others? So you are talking of liberal international order to perpetuate your leadership. So whatever leadership position the United Kingdom enjoyed before Second World War, that once it was defeated, once its economy was smashed, so that vacant position, that power vacuum was taken over by the United States. Right. So if there's Second World War and one country that benefited the most, that was the United States. Like we say that about Abdul Kalam. If there is only one person who benefited out of India's second nuclear test, it was Abdul Kalam. Because he was made a president after the nuclear test. So the point is, any country actually benefited, it was the United States because it was having nuclear weapons at a time when no other country possessed that. It defeated and militarily crushed Japan because of the weapons used, and also it had the opportunity to provide economic assistance to all other Western countries. So that kind of situation, that kind of military power and economic hegemony provided the United States the kind of authority it needed to exercise power, and it was the victorious nation, so it crafted all world economic and political order as per its convenience. Containment, which a democratic governance, became the intellectual blueprint for Cold War foreign policy, framing the USA confrontation with the Soviet Union. So the justification was given. You contain Soviet Union because it was a communist country. It is a problem to the democratic countries. You provided economic assistance to all the countries of the Western Europe or the democratic countries because you wanted democracy. What kind of democracy? Democracy acceptable to the Americans, right? So our democracy is the best. Our democracy is the model, and others try to follow that kind of democracy without giving any importance to the local context, whether they really want it or not, whether they actually have a different system or not. So that was not a matter. Right? So you wanted your form of government, you wanted your democracy to spread, you wanted your version of economic capitalism to spread. So that was basically the purpose. Right? They invented this, containment theory. So it's good for America, and it should be the duty of the democratic countries to support America because it is containing a totalitarian country called USSR. So that was the justification given in the containment theory. Mud nation theory. Simple. We teach our students in comparative politics, political development, political modernization. Those who are not modern, they are traditional, and then there are transitional, there are modern. And they should try to aspire to become politically developed like the United States. ये कॉन्सेप्ट हम पढ़ाते हैं ना पॉलिटिकल डेवलपमेंट में मॉडर्नाइजेशन में, ये ट्रेडिशनल है, ये ट्रांजिशनल है और ये मॉडर्न है. बट मॉडर्न कैसे होंगे? इफ यू आर एक्सेप्टेबल टू द यूनाइटेड स्टेट्स, यू फॉलो देयर मॉडल, देन यू विल बी द मॉडर्न, रियली मॉडर्न. So modernization, the hegemonic stability theory provided an academic rationale for sustaining US dominance, arguing it ensured global public goods. Hegemonic stability, unipolar बेस्ट है, मैक्सिमम बाइपोलर बेस्ट है, मल्टीपोलर तो बेकार है. थिंक ऑफ वर्ल्ड टच जस्टिफाइड bipolarity. Scots-Hagen justified bipolarity, right? So there are USA scholars who justified either unipolarity or bipolarity. Multipolarity was equated with chaos, political instability, problem of nuclear proliferation would be there. So there are so many problems with multipolar world. So in a way they justified everything that was suitable, that was serving the interest of the United States. So that was basically the issue. New liberal institutionalism, justified the creation and strengthening of international bodies that ultimately, valued American power and interest. I talked about the Bretton Woods systems, World Bank, IMF, everything was crafted that actually benefits the Americans or the American hegemony. Next slide, please. Yeah, so in looking at this perspective, how great powers actually use epistemic power or intellectual power to perpetuate their dominance and hegemony, then we can discuss something about India, how India can actually claim that kind of position. India is civilizational repository for fundamentally rethinking international relations. As I said, we have a long civilization. We have great scriptures. We have great texts. With that, bath in India, Nepal. So the point is, there are lots of people, there are lots of texts, there are lots of, the scriptures written forms that has not been used by any of the Indian higher scholars who are claiming to globalize that. Now it is time for all of us to think about that. This reclamation focuses on four critical areas that, as I said, theory, concept, methodology, and policy ideas. The aim is to construct alternative theoretical framework for global politics. So I don't say, you reject Western, but at the same time, you should accept if you have an opportunity. Why should we, you read the poetry about Thames, but you also talk the poetry about Ganga, Yamuna. There are so many, so why you should be cut off? So that is the problem, we should develop in. We will also, think of new concepts by contrasting them with established Western ideas. What are the concepts in India? From India's perspective, we have to think about those concepts that can actually offer an alternative to the Western ideas, basically to challenge methodological norms and propose tangible policy solutions. We have also to think about the methods of knowledge production from India's perspective, how we can make it, and in what way that will reduce the monopoly of the Western countries, particularly the Americans, in the IR field. So that should be the motto. Come to the theoretical portion. In theory, if you look at the IR theories, कोई problem है उसमें? Okay, just look at realism and liberalism versus ethical statecraft, what you call Rajdharm. In West, or if you look at liberalism and realism, there is a clear distinction between the state and ethics, right? So there is a separation of ethics from politics. But in Indian literature, you don't find that. Any Raja, any king has to be ethical. आप ऐसे नहीं शासन कर सकते हैं, right? So you have to follow ethics. You have to follow good governance. You cannot say we are totally cut off from ethics and we are totally cut off from morality. So the concept of morality, the concept of ethics is entrenched in Indian literature. But in Western literature, if you think of realism, you think of liberalism, think of constructivism, no, there is a clear separation of ethics from politics. You think of Indian statecraft or any Indian thinker who has talked about, you think of, Thiruvalluvar, you think of Kautilya. So everybody is talking of a statecraft that is ethical, that is moral, and the main purpose of the king is to serve the subjects, and that is in fact the claim of his legitimacy. अगर आप अच्छे से रूल नहीं करोगे तो nobody will obey you. You will go to नर्क. उस टाइप का जो कंसेप्ट है वो सब वेस्टर्न लिटरेचर में यू विल नॉट फाइंड दैट. वहां नर्क फंस जाने का कोई स्कोप नहीं है. तो हमारे यहाँ पे राजा के ऊपर पहले से कंडीशन है, यू हैव टू डू दिस. अगर आप ये नहीं करोगे, people have the right to go against you and you will straightforward go to hell. So that kind of ethics, my point is ethics, morality and power or politics are closely interlinked in the Indian tradition. Westphalian order versus dharm based order, जिसको कहते हैं धर्म और अधर्म का फर्क. If you look at Mahabharata, right? So Arjun is not, is not interested to kill his kith and kin. He is advised by Lord Krishna to do that because that is in the interest of dharma. आप अगर आप धर्म के लिए काम करोगे तो आपको ये फर्क नहीं बना ये मेरा रिश्तेदार है ये मेरा रिश्तेदार नहीं है. तो अगर आप ये भी देखते हो कि इन द वेस्टर्न लिटरेचर देयर इज ए लीनियर प्रोग्रेस ऑफ द स्टेट सिस्टम. लीनियर प्रोग्रेस का मतलब है डिसऑर्डर ऑर्डर. हमारे यहाँ पे है साइक्लिकल, धर्म अधर्म, फिर जब अधर्म का बहुत ज्यादा अधर्म बढ़ जाता है देयर इज ए कोलैप्स ऑफ द स्टेट, देयर इज ए कोलैप्स ऑफ द सिविलाइजेशन, देयर इज ए कोलैप्स ऑफ द ऑर्डर and there is restructuring. War concept is something very different from the Western, theories. Power transition theory of Organsky. Organsky claims that conflict is likely when rising power challenges a dominant power. ये तो चाइना अमेरिका के लिए एप्लीकेबल है. एस्टेब्लिश पावर कौन है? अमेरिका है. चैलेंजिंग पावर कौन है? चाइना है. अपने लिए कौन सा यहाँ पे एप्लीकेबल है? कभी सोचा इंडिया इज ऑल्सो राइजिंग? क्या हमारा ऐसा हो रहा है हम राइजिंग पावर है वो एस्टैब्लिश पावर है और हमारा लड़ाई हो रहा है, ऐसा कुछ हो रहा है? एप्लीकेबल ही नहीं है. थिंक ऑफ इंडिया के लिए एप्लीकेबल नहीं है. थिंक ऑफ ऑल्सो दिस रैशनल चॉइस वर्सेस मैटेरियलिज्म वर्सेस होलिस्टिक पॉलिटिकल इकोनॉमी. जैसे मैंने बताया कौटिल्य की जो अर्थशास्त्र है उसमें इंटीग्रेटेड वर्जन ऑफ इकोनॉमी, पब्लिक वेलफेयर, एथिकल गवर्नेंस. एथिकल गवर्नेंस वेस्टर्न रियलिज्म में, रैशनलिज्म में नहीं मिलेगा. अगर आपने सपोज यू आर अ मेंबर ऑफ एनी मिलिट्री अलायंसेस एंड दैट डजंट सर्व योर इंटरेस्ट, फॉरगेट इट. अपना यहाँ पे ऐसा नहीं है. हमारे यहाँ पे एथिकल, मोरल, पॉलिटिक्स ये सब इंटर रिलेटेड है एंड वी कैन थिंक ऑफ दैट. यूरोपियन और यूरोसेंट्रिक यूनिवर्सलिज्म वर्सेस वसुधैव कुटुंबकम. The kind of cosmopolitanism that is being taught by Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam is not available in the Western literature. Right? So they are talking of sovereign state, selfish state, autonomic state, or basically the states those who have no interest with each other. Right? We are talking of a different kind of order. Right? So you are basically focusing not on autonomic states, sovereign state systems, or you are not talking of something like hegemony, chaos, anarchy, this and that. Rather, we are talking of an international order that is supported by cosmopolitanism. When you have the vaccine, others don't have the vaccine, it is your duty to provide them vaccines. So that is the logic, right? So you are not always guided by your self-interest. There are situations when you have to go beyond your self-interest, and that is how I said, we have so many concepts, methodologies which we can borrow from this kind of literature. Next. Okay, key concept. What are the problems with key concept in Western, higher literature and Indian? Balance of power, right? So we are talking, Margantho is talking of the kind of anarchical situation, the kind of, state system, they are fighting against each other. When he's talking of self-help there, when he's talking of militarization, power, hegemony, all this. And for that, to maintain the peace and order in a sovereign and anarchical system, you need balance of power. We are not talking of that. When they talked about balance of power, we talked about non-alignment. We talked of strategic autonomy. We talked of multi-engagement. Right? So our concept of understanding the world is different from their balance of power theory. You have to understand this different. Humanitarian intervention versus responsibility to protect. Right? When there was any problem in any country, so you intervened militarily because you thought, that suits our interest. What USA did in Afghanistan, in Iraq, you fought against Taliban 20 years back. You dethroned Taliban in Afghanistan 20 years back. Again, you reinstalled Taliban and went back. 20 years, several trillion dollars, almost $950 billion in their Afghanistan mission. So you have no responsibility. You have people are, when the Americans, they vanish from Afghanistan, think of the situation. That people are, they are just, lying with the flight, and they are being killed by the speed of the, and just imagine that situation. So military intervention is fine, but you have to think of, first not humanitarian. You have a responsibility to protect the people where you are intervening. India also intervened in Sri Lanka. India also intervened in Maldives. India has never stayed in those countries. Just think of American intervention in Iraq, in Afghanistan, in many other countries. So they are not bothered what is happening to you. They are thinking of their interest only. That is the problem with their concept. So humanitarian concept or humanitarian intervention concept is no longer acceptable. That's why we are thinking of a new term, a refinished term, and that puts responsibility to the power that actually intervenes in a particular country. That's why instead of humanitarian intervention, think of responsibility to protect. What is we the economic aid versus development partnership. Americans, when they give any kind of monetary help, they will say, we are the donors, right? We are the donors. And when we use the word donor, it speaks of inequality. जमींदार जो पैसे देते हैं, उधार देते हैं, वो भी अलग होते हैं, जिनको उधार दिया गया वो भी अलग होते हैं. हम लोग उनको डोनर नहीं कहते, हम अपने आप को डोनर, we are partners. And when we are talking of partnership, it is based on equality. Right? When we talk of donor, it is inequality. When you talk of partnership, it is equality. So that is the difference between their concept and our concept. Material power hegemony. So the main purpose of the state is to be more and more power, capture more and more power. This power will help you to maintain hegemony, as Biersheimer says in offensive realism. So the main purpose of the state is to acquire more and more power, because a powerful state can maintain its hegemony as the United States is doing at present. But that is not our purpose. Rather, we are talking of not coercive power. Rather, we are talking of influence, right, to moral authority, and vaccine Maitri program is the best example. So the point is, material power is needed. So what is the purpose of acquiring power? What is the purpose of acquiring weapons? Yes, it should be clearly defined. If you have nuclear weapons, you have also equal responsibility not to use it unnecessarily. Right? So nuclear weapons is fine, but at the same time, there is a great responsibility bestowed on you, because you have to be very selective. You have to be very particular about the kind of weapons you have. You cannot use it because you have that weapons. So the point is, you have to think then hair trigger nuclear posture versus distributed nuclear posture. अमेरिका वगैरह कौन से न्यूक्लियर पोस्टर यूज करते हैं? हेयर ट्रिगर, लंच ऑन वार्निंग, रिमोट दबाया, न्यूक्लियर वेपन्स फायर होगा. हमारे यहाँ पे वो सिस्टम नहीं है. हमारी क्या न्यूक्लियर पोस्टर है? न्यूक्लियर वेपन्स किसके पास है? डिपार्टमेंट ऑफ एटॉमिक एनर्जी के पास है. मिसाइल किसके पास है? डीआरडीओ के पास है. न्यूक्लियर कमांड अथॉरिटी का हेड कौन है? प्राइम मिनिस्टर है. तीनों मिलेंगे तभी जाके न्यूक्लियर बम इकट्ठी होगा. तो इसलिए आप इंपोर्ट करके यू कांट यूज. सेम इज द केस विद पाकिस्तान, सेम इज द केस विद चाइना. ऑल दीज थ्री कंट्रीज दे फॉलो डिस्ट्रीब्यूटेड न्यूक्लियर पोस्चर. हम वो न्यूक्लियर डेटरेंस थ्योरी जो यूएसए और यूएसएसआर का कोल्ड वॉर के टाइम का जो थ्योरी है, मासिव डिस्ट्रक्शन, ये सब हम वी डोंट इन दैट. Rather, when India and Pakistan acquired nuclear weapons, It was called as nuclear flashpoint. South Asia one was considered as a nuclear flashpoint. बिल क्लिंटन वगैरह को याद करो, साउथ एशिया जो है न्यूक्लियर फ्लैश पॉइंट है। क्यों? क्योंकि यहाँ पे सब irrational लोग रहते हैं, किसी भी टाइम वो एक दूसरे को न्यूक्लियर बम मार के यूज करके मार देंगे एक दूसरे को। सो द पॉइंट इज वी वर कंसिडर्ड न्यूक्लियर फ्लैश पॉइंट। कितने बार न्यूक्लियर वॉर हुआ है अभी से? 83 में पाकिस्तान के पास बम है, 74 में इंडिया ने टेस्ट किया था। कितने बार कोई न्यूक्लियर वॉर हुआ है? कभी हुआ है क्या? सारी को सारे पागल है सब लोग, एक दूसरे को न्यूक्लियर बम। So the kind of thinking was totally irrational and racist, and that was the reason we have a different nuclear factor. We don't buy their theory, nuclear deterrence theory. We have our own theory, and that is based on no half, right? And as I said, to stop the frequent or immediate use of nuclear weapons, we have distributed nuclear posture, and that is a contribution to IR, particularly military strategies. तो आप इसको कैसे डिनाई कर दोगे कि इंडिया वाले कुछ नहीं जानते, पाकिस्तान वाले कुछ नहीं जानते? We know the weapons, we know the importance of the weapons, and also we have clear-cut strategies for using those weapons in extreme circumstances. अभी इंडिया पाकिस्तान का ऑपरेशन सिंदूर के पाकिस्तान ने बम गिरा दिया इंडिया के ऊपर? नहीं, इंडिया ने गिरा दिया। भाई स्टेप बाय स्टेप चलते हैं, ठीक है? We will go step wise because we know the importance of using nuclear weapons or not using the importance of nuclear weapons. So that was the reason. Next. Okay. Methodology में क्या क्या problems है? Basically, Western IR is based on quantitative analysis, and Indian methods are basically based on narrative and holistic inquiry, और जिसको तुम मतलब कह सकते हो quantified and measurable data versus stories and epics for contextual understanding. गौतम बुद्ध ने कौन सा फील्ड वर्क किया था? गौतम बुद्ध को जो नॉलेज, या प्रार्थना ने कौन सा क्वांटिटेटिव मेथड यूज किया था? गांधी जी ने कौन सा किया? कोई किया था क्या? उन्होंने जो कुछ नॉलेज दिया सब बेकार है? शुड वी से कि गांधी जी हैज नॉट फॉर्मुलेटेड ए हाइपोथेसिस, ही हैज नॉट कंडक्टेड द फील्ड ट्रिप? ना कह सकते हो गांधी जी की केस में कह सकते हो कि उन्होंने इंडिया को फ्रीडम स्ट्रगल में। प्रॉब्लम इज द वेस्टर्न मेथड ऑफ आईआर इज highly narrow because it is based on quantification of data, measurement of data, and that is not an, that may be one of the method, but you can't say this is the sole method of knowledge production. That is the problem, right? We have पंचतंत्र। अरे मूर्खों, तुम लोग पंचतंत्र का स्टोरी जानते हो ना? जो था, दो तीन बच्चे जो बिल्कुल गधे थे, मूर्ख थे, उनको समझाने के लिए पंचतंत्र का मतलब विष्णु शर्मा रोड पंचतंत्र। So so how can you ignore this? How can you ignore so many other examples? So the point is, their method may be one of the methods, but you can't say that is the sole method of knowledge production, and our methods are not necessary. Or you can't rely. You have, I said, you have Vedas, which have been written. Nobody can trace the history of Vedas, but they are written documents. So the point is, you have Shastras, you have Puranas, you have Quran, you have Bible, everything. Why not use those resources? There are so many historians in medieval India. Why not to use their sources of knowledge? The point is, we have a different kind of state. We have a different kind of civilization. In fact, we say civilizational state, not a nation state, because nation state is very narrow and it is based on material power and material construct. But civilization is based on spirituality. Civilization is based on cultural construct. So that is the difference. Then we have adversarial negotiation and dialogue, sincere dialogue, or what you say, samvad. Think of negotiation between the United States and USSR during the Arms Control Treaty or SALT 1, SALT 2, ये वो treaty जितना होता है. Basically, the purpose is zero sum game. You consider the opponent as a rival, your enemy. आप enemy के साथ जब negotiation करते हैं, you always think that you get the best. Enemy doesn't get anything. But our process of negotiation is different because we want, we don't believe in zero sum game. Rather, we believe shared understanding and truth. Just remember the dialogue between राही मौसम राजा, जो डायलॉग लिखे हैं ना कृष्ण और अर्जुन के बीच में, जो कन्वर्स, अगर कभी टाइम मिले उसको एक बार देख लेना, 4-5 एपिसोड देख लेना, उनको समझ में नहीं आएगा जो लोग. द पॉइंट इज, जब अलेक्जेंडर व्हेन अलेक्जेंडर वाज रिटर्निंग फ्रॉम इंडिया, उन्होंने देखा कि एक आदमी जो है पेड़ के ऊपर लटक के नीचे आग जल रहा है, सर को लटका के वो जो है ऐसे कर रहा है. सो अलेक्जेंडर लाफ्ड एट हिम. उनको लगा ये बेवकूफ क्या कर रहा है. दैट पर्सन आल्सो लाफ्ड एट अलेक्जेंडर. जो वो लटक के कर रहा था वो भी अलेक्जेंडर को देख के हंसा. तो अलेक्जेंडर ने अपनी ट्रांसलेटर को पूछा, इसको पूछो वो मेरे को देख के क्यों हंस रहा है. मैंने तो इसको जो देख के हंस किया मुझे समझ में आ रहा है, वो क्यों हंस रहा है. उसने कहा ही इज ट्राइंग टू conquer or detach from material power. तुम मेटेरियल पावर के पीछे हो, वो स्पिरिचुअल पावर के पीछे है. वो सोचता है तुम बेवकूफ हो, तुम सोचते हो वो बेवकूफ है. You got my point. So that sadhu was trying to master the material expectations, material hopes, and material kind of needs. And he was trying to detach himself from this sansaric or this mundane kind of world. But Alexander was doing exactly the opposite. So Alexander was thinking that the sadhu was a fool, and the sadhu was thinking this guy is a fool. So that kind of narration, we need to borrow from many examples. There are many historical examples. There are so many examples in the ancient period, in the medieval period, even in the colonial period. But these need to be come to the public discourse so that we know. Then rational actor model versus the Sthiti Prajna model. Now, they expect their leaders to be basically, leaders should be cold, rational actors, those who try to maximize the interest of the state. So, rational actors for the West is the person or the leader who tries to maximize their interest, particularly the state interest. But for India, it is guided by dharma, wisdom and discipline. ऐसे कोई भी leader जो होगा, उसकी एक अपनी personality होगा. He should be highly disciplined, right? And he should have some morality, and he is respected by his citizens, by his subjects. So ऐसे कोई leader नहीं हो सकता. So the kind of leadership requirements that is there in Arthashastra, in Manuskriti, in many other medieval texts, you find a lot of examples where we don't believe their kind of leadership or Max Weber kind of leadership. ठीक है, authority है, rational legal है, traditional है, charismatic है. So these are all artificial kind of things. Right? So you think of that way. There are methods you can. Then Eurocentric canons versus multi-source knowledge. Particularly, as I said, Western sources are basically narrow, but your scriptures, your indigenous perspective, they are rich in resources that need to be used for writing a theory of international relations. That needs to be used for reframing the concepts in international relations. That need to be used for giving good ideas for contemporary world problems like climate change or so many other problems. Needs to be there. Post-colonial critique or reconstructive civilization studies, but basically the post-colonial critiques diagnostic and opposite, whereas we believe in building alternative narratives. So this project of globalizing international relations is based on providing alternative narrative. It is not just based on criticism. Okay, you just criticize this and that. That is not the purpose. The purpose is you should have alternative ideas. You should provide alternative paradigms, and that should be the motto of this kind of research methods. Next, think of the policy ideas. Right, there are some policy ideas, particularly the West. In the West literature, you find sphere of influence. Instead of sphere of influence that talks of dominancy and hegemony, we talk of neighborhood first. Like I said, neighborhood first policy means it is not based on hegemony, right? Or simple, the problem is there are conceptual problems because they think in a different way, we think in a different way. They talk of Asia Pacific community, Asia Pacific community where India was not there, right? Then when India objected and there was bitter relationship between the United States, they thought of Indo-Pacific, where China is not there. Quad, China is not there. So the point is, these area studies, they were all created because that suited American interest. So the point is, there is never a concept, third world, first world, second world, global north, global south, all these conceptualizations, they are all motivated, they are all framed in a way that suits their interest, their language, their history, their culture. It is not nothing reflected in India. in from Indian sense of view. Supply driven human aid versus demand driven assistance. Whenever there is a natural disaster or whenever you provide any kind of assistance, you always go by demand of the required state. What Sri Lanka wants, you give it to Sri Lanka. What Maldives wants, you give it to Maldives. But what kind of Western assistance is given? They always give packed food without believing, without understanding the local cultural constant. जब भूज में गुजरात भूज में अर्थक्वेक हुआ था, अमेरिका से जो है जो ब्रेड और खाने पीने का जो पैक सामान था, इट वाज ऑल मेड इन बीफ. अरे गुजरात के लोग जैनी होते हैं, वो तो नॉर्मल प्याज लहसुन नहीं खाते, बीफ खाना तो दूर की बात है. यू गेट माय पॉइंट. सो आई वाज वंस ट्रैवलिंग इन ए टर्किश फ्लाइट. तो मुझे नहीं पता था जो लजानिया जो होता है, मुझे लगा लजानिया कुछ अच्छा होगा. तो मैंने उसको देखा, जब मैंने ब्रोचर देखा उसमें लिखा है बीफ, तो मैंने कहा भाई आई डोंट टेक बीफ, गिव मी ए नॉन बीफ लजानिया. तो उसने क्या किया, जो राइस है उसके ऊपर जो बीफ था उसको हटा दिया चामच में, मेरे वगैरह लो. यू अंडरस्टैंड, देयर इज ए कल्चरल प्रॉब्लम. देयर इज ए कल्चरल प्रॉब्लम बिकॉज दे थिंक दैट ओके यू डोंट टेक बीफ, बीफ को हटा देते हैं फिर खा लो. You got my point. So point is, their way of giving assistance is different. Our way of giving assistance is different. नेपाल में जब earthquake हुआ था, India was the first one to provide assistance to Nepal. When the assistance was photographed by the media, there is a strong protest in Nepal. आप किसी को अगर हेल्प करते हो, उसको मीडिया में पब्लिश करना ये बहुत ही बुरी बात है. That's why there was a strict reaction in Nepal against the Indian assistance. So the point is, nobody could not give an impression that you are the big person, you are the big country, and they are small countries, and they need your assistance. And if you don't give them assistance, they will suffer, or there will be some problem to them. That should not be the impression. So inequality, inferiority, नीचा दिखा के बात करना, वो सब these are not all accepted in international relations. ऐसा नहीं होना चाहिए. So the point is, there is a difference between their, humanitarian aid and our humanitarian assistance. That is again another point. Selective counter-terrorism versus comprehensive global convention. India is demanding for a global convention on international terrorism. It should not be selective. कि आपके साथ इसका, you think of terrorism in that way, और आपके साथ नहीं है तो. Before 9/11, India always said to America that Pakistan is creating a lot of terrorist violence in India. तो उन्होंने हमारे बहुत सारे सैटेलाइट है, स्पाई सैटेलाइट है, हमें तो कहीं नहीं दिखाई दे रहा है. आफ्टर 9/11 इंडिया, क्या आप तुम्हें दिखाई दे रहा है? ना, अब दिखाई देने लगा है. So it's always selective. You need a comprehensive type of solution, not a selective or discriminatory type of approach. Same is the case with this NPT framework. NPT divides nuclear hubs and nuclear have-nots. NPT divides nuclear hubs and nuclear have-nots, and the nuclear have-nots have given the commitment not to develop nuclear weapons in any way in future. Iraq वगैरह का जो Iran वगैरह का जो issue है, you can understand. But we always preferred nuclear comprehensive summit. Let us get rid of all these weapons. So that मैं ये नहीं कर रहा हूँ कि इंडिया जो कुछ कर रहा है बढ़िया है, सब कुछ ठीक ठाक है. But I am saying we take a different position because of our difference in history, difference in culture, difference in understanding so many things. So that is the point I just wanted to highlight. Next is restricted migration versus Atithi Devo Bhava. Right? So we have, you can't say India is hosting a large number of refugees. But at the same time, if you take the World Bank data, in 2023, India hosted some 253,000 refugees. Right? This is despite not signing any international convention on refugees. So the point is, our understanding of refugee is different. Your understanding of refugee is different. So, and we want to know these differences so that that can be used as a concept in the international relations. Next slide, please. NPT, मैंने बता दिया. Yes. Now, if we know the difference in the Indian perception of theories, concepts, methods, and ideas, and the Western perception of this, then the question is how you can actually contribute for the globalization of the discipline. The first is reform IR curriculum. कोई भी IR का टेक्स्ट बुक ले लो, सारे रियलिज्म, लिबरलिज्म, पॉजिटिविस्ट मेथड, पोस्ट पॉजिटिविस्ट मेथड, ये सब होंगे सारे कॉन्सेप्ट, बैलेंस ऑफ पावर का। मैं खुद का अगर मैं भी यही पढ़ाता हूँ, but we want to break that, kind of narrowness, or that is being perpetuated by generations and generations. That's why we have planned a seminar in the mid-November to decolonialize the discipline, and you are all welcome to contribute to that seminar, because we want to bring some four volumes on the Indian perception of IR theories, IR concepts, IR methods, and IR ideas. So we will not just criticize. We want to have a gathering of all the important scholars, and you come, you deliberate, you think of those kind of things which I highlighted, and you contribute a research paper that we will publish that by a reputed publishing house, not as a research book, rather a textbook, because the students desperately need that kind of textbooks. आपका हमें ऐसा ना, हमें जो पढ़ाया गया हमने तुम्हें पढ़ाया, तुम्हें जो पढ़ाया जा रहा है तुम उसको अपने स्टूडेंट को पढ़ाओगे तो कहाँ पे वो ब्रेक होगा? अरे प्रॉब्लम यही है, मतलब बंदरगाह जानते हो? बंदरगाह जानते हो ना? हाँ, तो उड़ीसा में एक पोर्ट है जिसका नाम है पारादीप। उड़ीसा में एक पोर्ट है पारादीप, तो किसी ने लिखा पारादीप इज डैश, पीछे जो बैठा था उसको देखा नहीं, उसने लिखा पारादीप, उसने ऊपर वाला लिखा है पारादीप एक बंदर है, बंदरगाह के सेंस में वो कह रहा है। दूसरा उसको देख के लग रहा है बंदर का मतलब मंकी है, वो लिख रहा है पारादीप एक मंकी है। प्रॉब्लम कहीं ना कहीं हम डिस्टॉर्टेड हो रहे हैं। जैसे मैंने बताया कि समटाइम्स वी शुड फील असेम्ड ऑफ आवरसेल्फ एज एकेडमिक्स। देखिए अमिताभ आचार्य बहुत बड़े बड़े काम कर रहे हैं, बहुत अच्छी बात है, वी शुड अप्रिशिएट। मैं चाहता हूं उन लोगों को टेक्स्ट बुक लिखें ताकि आप लोगों को वो मिले और आप उसको पढ़ें। बड़े बड़े बात, पोस्ट कॉलोनियलिज्म, पोस्ट स्ट्रक्चरलिज्म, पोस्ट कॉलोनियल, ये सब ठीक है, बड़े बड़े बात है, बट प्रैक्टिस में हमें चाहिए, वी नीड गुड स्कॉलर्स हु कैन राइट गुड क्वालिटी टेक्स्ट बुक, right? Then only we can solve the problem. Then establish world-class research think tanks. As I said, we need good quality research foundation think tanks so that they can actually do research the way the Rand Corporation, the McAfee Foundation, the Ford Foundation, they have done for the discipline in America, or the Royal Institute of International Affairs, what it did for the United Kingdom. Then establish, then promote IR in Indian languages. How many of you know about थिरुवल्लभर? सबको कौटिल्य के बारे में पता है, थिरुवल्लभर के बारे में किसको पता है? कितने लोगों को पता है? थिरुवल्लभर was even more, in terms of knowledge and wisdom, he was one of the most, interesting IR scholar on statecraft. किसी को कुछ नहीं पता, खाली पीएम जब तमिलनाडु जाएंगे तब तमिलनाडु का कॉस्ट्यूम पहन लेंगे, you got my, और तमिल में दो चार वर्ड कह दोगे कहा कि लोग ताली मत, that is not the purpose. Unless and until you localize Indian international relations, you cannot bring the best elements of local IR. थिरुकुराल जो है, जो बुक उसने लिखा है थिरुवल्लभर ने, थिरुकुराल is made in slow pitch and that is available in local Tamil language. We need good translated work of that, and that's how you can, you can compare, or you are in a position to compare Kautilya with Thiruvallabhar. And again, there is a problem in North India versus South India, right? So हम सोचते हैं कि IR का जो कुछ हो रहा है, ग्लोबलाइजेशन हो रहा है, डेमोक्रेटाइजेशन, इट्स ऑल नॉर्थ रिस्पॉन्सिबिलिटी। लेकिन वो नॉर्थ साउथ का जो डिबेट हो इंडिया के अंदर भी है, यहाँ पे नॉर्थ इंडिया कुछ है, वहां पे साउथ इंडिया कुछ है, सो दैट शुड नॉट बी द अप्रोच। द अप्रोच इज वी शुड translate the classical text into regional languages so that those who are not fortunate enough from Aligarh to come to Delhi University, to come to JNU, so they have an opportunity to study the first-hand text. So that can only be possible when you regionalize, when you translate those, IR concepts and theories in regional language. When you invest in scholar diplomatic dialogue. In India, we have a gap of industry, academics, policy maker. पॉलिसी मेकर को लगता है एकेडमिक में जितने लोग हैं सब बेवकूफ हैं, मैं एक बार जो है शास्त्री भवन गया था जहाँ पे मिनिस्टर ऑफ एजुकेशन का, तो ही मेड एन इंटरेस्टिंग पॉइंट। जो सेक्रेटरी था, एजुकेशन सेक्रेटरी, वो मुझे कहने लगा कि आप क्या करते हो? मैंने कहा भाई मैं प्रोफेसर हूँ किसी सेंट्रल यूनिवर्सिटी में। तो कहला वी डोंट लाइक द एकेडमिक्स। तो मैंने कहा ऐसा क्यों? कहला वी लाइक द पॉलिटिशियन, क्योंकि वो कभी ना नहीं करते। पॉलिटिशियन को जो भी कोई काम करोगे करेगा, नहीं करेगा कहेगा हाँ कर दूंगा। वी डोंट लाइक, वी ऑल्सो लाइक ब्यूरोक्रेट्स, क्योंकि ब्यूरोक्रेट कभी कोई काम को करेगा या हाँ नहीं करेगा। ठीक है मैं देखूंगा, अगर लॉ के हिसाब से होगा मैं कर दूंगा, नहीं होगा तो नहीं करूंगा। वो साफ सुफ कह देता है या तो करेगा या तो नहीं करेगा। एकेडमिक्स लोगों का प्रॉब्लम है, ना तो वो हाँ कहते हैं ना तो वो ना करते हैं। अगर आप कोई भी काम दोगे, एकेडमिक रिसर्च दोगे, तो ठीक है ये भी हो सकता है, दूसरा आएगा तो वो भी हो सकता है। तो देर इज ए प्रॉब्लम इन एकेडमिक्स, क्योंकि आप लोग कोई क्लियर कट करके बोलते नहीं। जब भी जैसे आपको सिचुएशन होगा, अब उसी हिसाब से कहते ये भी होगा वो भी होगा। So that is the reason why we don't believe in academics, or we don't like the academics. Anyway, that may be a joke, but the problem is there is always a gap between the academic community and the policymakers on the one hand, and policymakers and the market. Market को जो चाहिए वो academics produce नहीं करते हैं। हमारे जो स्टूडेंट्स सारे जो एनईपी हो रहा है, ये हो रहा है, कितने परसेंट बच्चे एक्चुअली ट्रेंड है जो मार्केट के हिसाब से जिनको जॉब मिलेगा? कहीं ना कहीं वो भी एक प्रॉब्लम है। So because the problem, unlike America and other countries, we may criticize them. There are good things we must borrow from them, and there is a clear-cut relationship between academics and policymakers in America. And whatever the students learn from the universities, that is demanded in the market. इसलिए ज्यादातर प्रेसिडेंट प्राइम मिनिस्टर होते हैं वो ज्यादातर एकेडमिक्स में जाके ज्वाइन करते हैं। हमारे यहाँ पे कोई प्रेसिडेंट आजकल एक आध आने लगे हैं, सुप्रीम कोर्ट का चीफ जस्टिस वगैरह, नेशनल लॉ स्कूल वगैरह जन। हमारे यहाँ पे अगर कोई बड़ा नेता, बड़ा पीएम कोई मतलब स्कूल या मतलब यूनिवर्सिटी वगैरह में प्रोफेसर, इट इज कंसिडर्ड समथिंग इंसल्टिंग। अरे आप पीएम थे, प्रेसिडेंट थे, एक्सेप्ट अब्दुल कलाम को छोड़ के मेरे ख्याल में कोई भी ऐसा नहीं है जिनका नाम हम ले सकते हैं, those who preferred academic life after their retirement from politics. So that is a great problem in India that we should acknowledge. The last, yeah, support global south, global south global networks. Indonesians are doing good work in Ireland. Chinese are doing good work. South Koreans are doing good work. Indians are doing good work. Afghans are doing work. There should be a network, so that we borrow from them, they borrow from us, and that is how we can generalize the theory, we can universalize theory. ऐसा नहीं आप कोई theory बनाओ खाली इंडिया को समझ में आए बाकी किसी को समझ में नहीं आए। So that kind of gap should not be there, and that you can bridge only when you have a cross fertilization of ideas. You borrow, they borrow from you. That is how you know them and they know you. So that is the approach. Next one, please. Similarly, intellectual increase investment in think tanks to produce and promote globally relevant scholarship. That said, you need good quality like Observer Research Foundation है, IDS है, बहुत सारे दूसरे मतलब think tanks है, we should IPCS है, बहुत सारे हैं और बहुत सारे की जरूरत है। Can develop sophisticated strategies to articulate India's worldview policy positions. कई बार आपका ऑपरेशन सिंदूर में देखो, इंडिया करे सक्सेसफुल हुआ है, इट गॉट विक्ट्री। पाकिस्तान करे वो भी विक्ट्री। मतलब पाकिस्तान वाले ज्यादा स्मार्ट हो गए इंडिया को इसमें पीटने में। पॉइंट इज इट्स नॉट इम्पोर्टेंट दैट यू गॉट विक्ट्री, इट इज इम्पोर्टेंट हाउ यू बिल्ड योर नैरेटिव। और ये सब चीजों की वजह से आपको फॉरेन डेलीगेशन भेजना पड़ा दूसरे देशों को, सो दैट यू मेक क्लियर अबाउट योर पोजिशन। Point is, it's not important that you have your own worldview. Rather, it is important that you project those worldviews. Others know about your worldviews. That's again important. The next is your cultural diplomacy and use of soft power. You know all this. I'll skip that. Bridging divide and consensus is basically actively work for foster consensus and global issues, positioning India as a partner. Now we are debating on climate change. We're debating on data governance. We're debating on so many other issues. Now it is the time for you. India did not participate seriously in the NPT debate, and it suffered for almost 40 years. India boycotted this activity. You know the implications. Now it's the time to participate. Even if you have reservation, You try to, overcome those, problems with others. And that is one good thing India did about WTO or trade negotiations. India is always active. India is always, participating in the issues. Point is, it's not the time to boycott. It is not the time to say no. Rather, you have to bridge the, gap. And if they have a position, you have a position. You have to bargain so that you reach an agreement that is also acceptable to you and your, foreign policy. Leading, as I said, basically, uphold democratic values and pluralism domestically to reinforce credibility. So, if you don't govern your people properly, if there is a governance deficit domestically, you can't claim legitimacy. Right? So the point is, in order to show to others any kind of higher theme, higher concept, higher methodology, first of all, you have to improve your governance. If you create divisions, if you create hate crime, if you create all sort of problems, that will definitely discredit you. The point is, if India, would be good in governance, domestic governance, that would create a positive impact. If you are secular, if you are multicultural, if you are, you really believe in unity in diversity, these are all good values. It should not be only in theory, it should be practice. Right? So all, all people, those who are living in this country, they are the citizens of the country. So there should not be any kind of discrimination, open or secret kind of discrimination, hidden kind of discrimination. Always and only you improve your demo, not for others, not for democratic record. Rather, I'm saying, governance, democracy, secularism, these are all important values. And unless and until you practice that in the true spirit, nobody will take you seriously. So that would be, yeah. So, so the point is reclaiming the India is crucial for India's legitimate rights as a global power, leveraging epistemic power akin to Britain and USA. So what they did, you can do that. And when you are trying to democratize, international relations, that's a good thing. But that will also support your right. So you should be very extra cautious. You should be extra cautious in focusing those kind of narrative, those kind of theories, those kind of concepts that actually support your rights. India must, however, avoid policy of intellectual hegemony that led to exclusionary world orders, perpetuating a civilizing kind of mission or imposing a single democratic model. आप उनसे सीखो, बट उन्होंने जो गलती किया आप उसको दोहराओ नहीं. उन्होंने जो सिविलाइजिंग मिशन का यूज किया, उन्होंने इंटेलिजेंस किया, उन्होंने जैसे इराक और अफगानिस्तान के ऊपर अटैक किया. डोंट डू दैट, because again your credibility will suffer. So you borrow from them, you learn from them, you criticize them, you disagree with them, but don't come with the same. We have committed over the period of time. Indian perspective provide alternative theories, concept, methodology, and policies, fostering genuine multilateralism and cooperation. So, what is your contribution to these all? What is India's perception of power? What is Indian perception of refugees? What is India's perception on nuclear disarmament? What is India's perception on climate change? Well, that should be clearly understood. As I said, it should be our effort to focus on those kind of textbook, to decolonialize the textbook, to decolonialize, so that our students really get the benefit of analyzed discipline. Institutional transformation and strategies are vital for this reclamation, ensuring a truly indigenous. So I said it should be institutional. Indian international studies. And why should you the international studies of America by Canadians and the US? Why should you don't have that? You have that kind of professional assistance. This kind of things. Why you are all getting it published or American journal? Why not to your quality of journals? That can also be equally. When this in contribute to more pluralistic and stable international in shared wisdom in core doctrines. So you borrow from them, but you don't commit kind of mistake what 100 years back, 200 years back. Conclusion is, try to democratize use this for your use that for getting international legitimacy international community. Thank you. पूछना तो आप पूछ लो, अगर सिलेक्टिव प्लीज बताएं। नहीं थोड़ा बताओ। Good question. There is a problem of ignorance. I always say ignorance is good, but ignorance combined with arrogance is dangerous. You got my point? Basically, the politicians, they are ignorant, and those who are advising them are ignorant. They don't know the, I think the policymakers should be invited to this kind of gatherings. And my plan to conduct a seminar in November in our department is to invite some policymakers, those who come and know what is happening. They are not, राजा को नहीं पता कि क्या कुछ हो रहा है, उसका जो था चमचा होते हैं वही उसको उल्टा सीधा पढ़ाते हैं, सब कुछ बढ़िया है जी. You got my point? So that kind of situation is happening. एजुकेशन में अभी ज्यादा पैसा लगाना चाहिए. थिंक ऑफ चाइना. मैंने सांघाई यूनिवर्सिटी गया था. सांघाई यूनिवर्सिटी में, जो फुटान यूनिवर्सिटी इन सांघाई है, यूनिवर्सिटी को देखोगे आपको लगेगा कि यू आर नॉट इन यूनिवर्सिटी. इतना बढ़िया मतलब जो है बिल्डिंग है, इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर है सब. हमारे यूनिवर्सिटी का देखो, टॉयलेट भी आप जाना चाहोगे 2 बार सोचोगे. पॉइंट देखो, पैसे भी खर्च हो रहा है, मैनेजमेंट सही नहीं है, फंडिंग की प्रॉब्लम है. तो आई थिंक द